getting the rest of the introductions out of the way, yeah, I'm Sam Bishop. I'm the person giving the talk, and I'm a freelance software developer and just general consultant in that respect. I'm also working on space robots at a company I founded. And recently I started recording a podcast about gender with one of my friends. It is not yet released, but pre-recording ADHD people takes time. The rest of the contact info is there on the bottom of the slide there. And let's get into the meat of the talk for today, Minecraft. So for anyone who hasn't seen Minecraft, it looks a bit like that. And let's actually get into what it is. So other than being a game, Minecraft was created by Hatsune Miku, Marcus Pearson, also known as Notch. And its first public release was on May 17th of 2009, which makes it surprisingly old for a video game that's still being played extremely actively today, but it owes its longevity to being a fairly simple game. It's inspired by games like Dwarf Fortress and Infiniminer, and it is basically just a sandbox game where you build, explore, make puzzles, break things, and just generally have fun with all manner of little block-shaped things. And that's the overall synopsis, but there's a lot of history in that first year and a bit, because from that first public release on the 17th, within the first month, they added multiplayer. That was the very first multiplayer version that was released. And this was back when you literally had to play it inside of a web browser. It wasn't even downloadable. It was actually launched as a web-executed JavaScript applet, if any of you remember that kind of stuff. It kind of a dead technology now, but that was literally how it was first deployed. As development continued, eventually multiplayer was removed, but that was part of developing a new set of features, so within a month it was back again, and then less than 2 months later it was gone again. But after Notch finally settled down and actually decided what he wanted to have in the game and not in the game, survival multiplayer as it is known today sort of appeared in its first form, that very first release of the alpha sort of version of the game. And within a month, people started modding it, because as soon as they had a stable version of the game that wasn't going anywhere, they wanted to have a server up. They wanted to have a persistent world that they could play within their friends. And, well, at this point in Minecraft's history, it didn't really have a lot of tools to help you make that experience particularly nice. There were no permissions, no management systems, nothing to stop anyone who finds the IP address of your server coming in and destroying everything you've done. So within the very first month, people were developing tools to improve that, such as SMP Server Wrapper and HMod, two of the very first admin mods ever released for Minecraft. And literally the very next day, someone released an anti-griefing tool that worked with HMod, because even what HMod did was not enough. They needed even more. So right from the start, mods and open source software have been contributing to making Minecraft a fun experience for people to play online. And some of these projects are quite long-lived, such as Runecraft. Its first alpha came out, again, within a very, very short window of time after that, so less than 2 months after the very first stable multiplayer was available, someone had made a mod that is still continuing to this very day. It actually pioneered a number of things that Minecraft eventually added to the base game. They implemented an enchanting system, and then Mojang eventually built their own later on. HMod, after that, added a plugin mechanism. That's the first extensible set of open source tools that started to form. Before this point, everything was, don't step on my toes, I won't step on yours, and a lot of sort of that very early manual script stuff. And then a little bit later, there were enough mods that people started going, hang on a minute, I keep breaking things when I try and load my mods. So we're going in from less than 3 months' time from these very first mods being released to having so many mods out there that people needed tools to control the complexity of those mods. The growth of this whole open source ecosystem and modding around Minecraft was quite rapid, and fortunately quite resilient, because less than 2 weeks after that mod loader was released, the first major upgrades happened to Minecraft and broke literally everything. But they bounced back fairly quickly and, as open source tends to do, continued developing. So when it comes to Minecraft, I feel like there's not really a singular definition of open source that fits, other than this one. Because when it comes to open source and Minecraft, there is more than just the traditional source code involved. There are more things that are open source when it comes to Minecraft than just code you get off GitHub. So describing any product whose composition or method of manufacturing is public knowledge and not proprietary fits once you start thinking about what else people look up and share in Minecraft. People look up and share lots of things other than the code. There is extensive documentation on how to construct things the way that you want them to look. How do you position these blocks in order to get curves to look the right way? How do you assemble this machine using the redstone blueprints in order to get it to work on a 5-second timer or a 6-second timer? And these are, in a way, open source. Less the blueprint construction for static things, but nonetheless, when you think about open hardware and things like 3D printing, the OpenSCAD source code for a 3D model is no less a set of open source instructions on how to make it than a set of instructions that say if you want to have a nice curve, you need to use one square block, one diagonal block, a flat half block, and so on like that. But when it comes to the redstone and that logic stuff, it really is like open hardware. Because you have everything from basic circuits, simple little things that might be as simple as turn the lights on when you open the door and come in my little base, to things like transmission networks where you have to handle lines crossing and deal with making sure that you don't have signals getting connected the wrong way. You've got automatic loops controlling simple machines, like in that bottom left corner there is an automatic farm. That will just take care of itself because you've built a logic system around it that reacts and controls based automatically on what you wanted it to do. And then you get the extreme projects, things like in that bottom right corner there, that is a full 8-bit shift register implemented in Minecraft. And that's an open blueprint someone has published that you could use to build a larger, bigger computer out of redstone constructed in Minecraft. And if that isn't open hardware, I really describe it because it clearly is. And that's a pretty impressive thing to have inside of a game that's written inside the open source Java programming language and uses the lightweight Java game library. And both of those are fairly popular tools. That lightweight Java game library is also used by Project Zomboid and quite a number of other indie games as well. They have a very nice homepage, which I grabbed that little animation off. But on top of that, Minecraft is actually, over its history, open sourced a few components. Mojang actually went out of their way and released 2 components of Minecraft as open source libraries some time ago. They released the Brigadier command and parser and dispatching tool that they use to handle a number of things internally. And they also released a library that they use to fix up mangled data whenever they do changes to worlds, with upgrades needing to change the format of the files on disk. So these 2 components got open sourced. They're not huge parts of it, but nonetheless, it shows that even now things do continue to change and more of this game is open source over time. And the thing about open source is that people have to be ones that write it, and people have to eat. So there is going to be money around this. And for the first half of Minecraft's life, that was the Mojang side of things. That was Notch and his small team beginning this whole project. And they managed to sell 60 million copies before they were bought by Microsoft. In that last year, they were generating $100 million US from Minecraft alone, out of just shy of 300 million revenue as a whole company, which is pretty good for only having been running for 5 years, because it went from a indie game released on a web forum that could only be played in a web browser with no purchase requirement whatsoever to $100 million in game and merchandising sales in less than 5 years, which is quite impressive, and it paid for a lot of work. And it also got the attention of Microsoft, who bought it. Now, they bought it for $2.5 billion, and they've clearly been getting a pretty good return on it, because the mobile device sales alone, in terms of buying copies of Minecraft on mobile phones and app stores, and the in-app purchases for things like Minecoins and stuff, have consistently generated, as an absolute minimum, $75 million US a year. And just after the pandemic, they were pulling in about $160 million for that year. So they've been making a pretty respectable return on that company acquiring. And that just raises the next question of what about everyone else? Because it turns out that there is a lot of other people making money off Minecraft, not just people selling artwork. There are people who run servers professionally. And popular Minecraft servers with hundreds or even thousands of players can actually earn those server operators upwards of $10,000 a month. Now, that's not factoring in what it's going to cost to run it, but nonetheless, that is a respectable living if you manage a business well. And the largest of those servers, Hypixel, which routinely has more than 10,000 players on it, has, based on the estimates I was able to find, potential revenues over $1 million a month. Now, that is not a small thing to consider, because $1 million a month buys you a lot of software development, a lot of hardware management, and a lot of people's livings. And that's why these servers are actually made up of a lot of proprietary and open source software. They build custom game modes, so they will pay software developers to write specific things for them. They have heavily modified their servers with open source software. They're using open source server proxies if they aren't writing their own. They're running modded games and as well as open source games that they might just tweak a little bit. And on top of that, they're also running websites and stores and membership systems that are typically written or using established open source software such as PHP or Python or whatever web framework you want to think about, and libraries to talk to companies like Stripe and PayPal. So there is a fair amount moving around there. And when you actually start to look at how it comes together, you've got this situation of, well, what is the situation as a whole? And as a whole, it has kind of an interesting effect. These servers could not literally have gotten that big that they can make that kind of money without open source. Because right from those very first days, those admin mods that made it possible for people to manage a busy server, that wasn't Mojang. That was open source developers writing these mods, adding them to the game, and making it possible for people to do more. Mojang haven't bothered to implement these kinds of capabilities, partly because they're choosing not to, and partly because there are people who are doing that already, and if it's not a pressing need for them, they obviously don't have a pressing need to make that change. So these people making a living from Minecraft are doing it with open source software, and nothing to sneeze at, because on top of that, there's well-known limits of these Minecraft servers. The default Minecraft server can only accommodate, if you're lucky, 250 people, but you will not get to 250 people doing stuff unless you already start changing it. Because there are, in addition to performance bottlenecks, a lot of other glitches that start to happen. And the first things that people started to do when they were modifying this stuff in their open source servers were fix these glitches. Again, Mojang aren't really focused on that. So once again, people trying to run bigger servers, make a living, grow a community, are all doing this on the back of open source software. And that's where we get these kind of four categories of things put together. We've got the mods themselves, the mod loaders, the servers, and the libraries underneath all of this. So looking at it from sort of the top-down perspective, there's the mod loaders. These are the things that determine how to pull everything in the right order so that nothing steps on its toes. They're the bouncer at the front of the line steering everyone through the door. They don't necessarily do a lot themselves, but they are crucial to having a whole bunch of mods, and some of the mod packs that are out there are now hundreds of mods large, multiple hundreds of megabytes, well into the gigabytes on large mods with graphics. That needs to be corralled and managed the right way, otherwise everything gets out of whack and the game just crashes straight away. But the mod loaders do a good job of that. And the first one out the gate was Mod Loader, which I did mention earlier. That was literally within a month of Minecraft getting a stable server. But it has fallen by the wayside over the years. And at the moment, the main four are Forge, Fabric, Quilt, and NeoForge, with NeoForge being a fork of Forge. There was sort of a philosophical difference in perspective and whether they wanted backwards compatibility, and so they sort of are going their separate ways. But at the same time, all of these get used by most of the mods. Mods have to pick one of these. And then what it turns out is that most of them have built their own abstraction libraries. So there are abstraction libraries that let you pick one or more of these mod loaders, and then your mod just gets built. So like building for Windows and building for Mac and building for Linux, you will compile your mods so that you've built for Forge, built for Fabric, built for Quilt, built for NeoForge, if you want to. Some people don't. But most of the larger ones do. And so that's where we get into the next step of it all, which is the servers. So over the years, there's been a number of trends in Minecraft servers. There is the ever-present vanilla one with all of its mistakes and limitations. But over time, several sets of people have made a fairly massive impact on this ecosystem, starting off with Bucket. Because Bucket was the first major one. So it came out the gate fairly early on. And by providing a plugin API so that when you wrote mods, you didn't have to do as much yourself, they quickly established a lot of usage. At its peak, over 100,000 servers were running with Bucket, and that was far in excess, 90% territory of the number of servers at the time. And it was developed by reverse engineering, which is kind of a bit of a question mark when it comes to open source and legal details, which is why soon after they started getting fairly established, Mojang kind of tapped them on the shoulder and went, hey, that's our code you're tinkering with. And so there was a discussion between the people in that project at one of the conventions where everyone gathered, and they agreed to sell the project to Mojang. So they agreed to sell the project to Mojang. Mojang then held the copyright to Bucket. But 4 members joined Mojang to work as employees, and 1 remained in charge of the project, continuing to work out there in the open. So effectively sort of splitting up this project, but not really shutting it down. And a few years later, that outside developer, Evil Seth, wanted to shut the project down. Mojang pointed out, that's not your project. We own it. And all of a sudden, all of those open source contributors who weren't part of that core team were kind of surprised to realize, hey, wait a minute. This was a project out here on a GitHub org, not a Mojang thing. What do you mean it's a Mojang thing? Plenty of them weren't happy. And one of them was so unhappy they decided to submit a DCMA takedown for every commit they had ever written to the project, which was 150,000 lines of code. It basically broke the project, fully broke it, and it had some significant follow-on effects because at that point, a lot of people were using stuff based on this. A lot of mods were based on this. A lot of mods that your mod might use were based on this. There was a cascading effect down here. It's like chopping the tree out right at the root. But fortunately, there was something to pick up after this because Spigot was a fork of Bucket. And because its compatibility was quite good, it was able to, before this event, pick up enough users that they actually built some momentum. And they actually got quite a lot of that momentum in the last few months before everything happened with Bucket, because they were the first to develop a server proxy. I mentioned them earlier, and I'm going to explain a little more in a second. But that server proxy is a crucial part of where they got external funding and a lot of attention, which made them able to jump over this DCMA hurdle. They were able to reverse engineer their process, re-engineer the way it worked, and switched from ahead of time bringing in Minecraft's code from Mojang and modifying it and then redistributing it to patching it at runtime. So instead of them touching Mojang's code, it was the person running the server, and that cleared them from that legal liability, which is a clever way around the problem and a way that has stuck around. Most of the modified servers now continue to work this way because it is the clear way, and Mojang haven't gone after anyone for it. So as they built that server proxy, it's an interesting little detail. Who here's played a multiplayer server like World of Warcraft? Most people have played one at some point? Yeah. The way they get thousands and thousands and thousands of people in these game worlds is with a technique called instancing. And instancing works by taking your login information, your session, and deciding where it needs to go based on the server load and what's going on. So you'll wind up in the main world, and then you'll go and join a raid dungeon, and you'll be put in an instance of that raid dungeon. It's not one server running every single thing at the same time. It's one of a whole fleet. Kind of like a reverse proxy on a web server, but a little bit more sophisticated because it's got to deal with all the game state. But they developed that first one of those. which was immediately used by one of the larger Minecraft server networks to significantly expand, and they actually got funding to help maintain that. So Bungee Cord was that very first one. And shortly along the way, we got new developments from the next major group that picked things up, who went on to develop one called Waterfall. And because these guys are quite relentless about performance, they completely rewrote the entire thing and decided to deprecate the previous one because that one's too hard to maintain and keep improving. This is the one we now maintain. So they've actually built two whole ones, that Paper MC project, having Waterfall and Velocity. And this is how you get server networks with tens of thousands of players for a game that is known to crash with more than 250 people in a server. And Paper are one of the ones continuing to push this a long way forward. So they were one of the first to work with asynchronous loading. So by default, the entire game world gets loaded in synchronously in a single-threaded loop, and that's obviously going to slow down the game engine. But they've changed that. They released a version that actually asynchronously loaded the terrain from disk and significantly sped things up. And they've introduced a number of other performance improvements over the years in lots of little different places, from parsing, terrain management, player ticks, updates, cycles, all the internal little loops and features that make the whole thing work. But they're continuing to push this. They're actually working on an incredibly experimental Minecraft server that basically breaks the entire server up into a multi-process managed environment where they're dispatching individual things to dozens of workers. In fact, the minimum number of cores required to run Folia, which is the name of that project, is 16. You actually need to be using a 16-core processor before you can run this Minecraft server. It is built to be that big and that scalable. They're going to have to work to shrink it a bit, but it's an impressive start on quite a significant change to a project that is behind a lot of these massive servers. And all of this is in effort to run what you actually see when you actually play the game, the mods that you are experiencing as a player. All that being the under-the-hood infrastructure. What does it look like on the actual front end? Well, quickly some stats. So the older, more established hosting environment, CurseForge, has over 10,000 server-side mods and equally as many client-side. And Modrinth being a newer one, there's a bit more fine-grained, so I was able to pluck out how many of them claimed to be open source on that one. And they were claiming that there were more than 2,460 open source server-side mods for Minecraft at the current date. And they really do have an incredible amount of power to change the game. It's a little hard to see in that screenshot there, but if you know the game, you'll notice that that's not the default water, because that is a client-side shader mod that has completely revamped the graphics layer. And from simple things like just changing the way game behaviors happen, so instead of having to chop every block out, you can knock the tree down like it's being hit over, or just a simple item swap, like having iron chests. This is actually quite a popular one, and it's been kicking for nearly a decade now at this point, just because it's simple and everyone kind of likes it because it's pretty. But again, it's open source and maintained by a passionate developer. And then you get the more impressive ones. This is actually a Minecraft mod. It really looks like a completely different game. But that is how much power client-side and server-side mods have to change the experience of a player inside a Minecraft server. So this is the Create mod, and this is their little welcome video that they have, just sort of showing off what is in this game. And it is a staggering thing to watch just how much they've added to Minecraft. It's still inside a Minecraft launcher. You open Minecraft to run this, and it looks like this is a completely different thing. And it's all powered by a lot of other pieces, though. So you get things like these library mods. So library mods provide basic functionality that gets reused by other mods. So you have things like World Guard, World Edit, Decent Holograms, and Rhino. Now, World Edit is a power tool to effectively speed up building terrain if you're managing to run a server or just really want to get wild and creative with it. World Guard lets you stop people from destroying other people's stuff. Or it lets you set a town up so that your player in your single-player adventure can't just demolish the town where the NPC gives them the quests. Decent Holograms is a way of putting user interfaces up inside the game. And Rhino is actually an embedded JavaScript engine to provide scripting facilities for other mods. And it's actually used by WorldEdit to provide some of the functionality, like the formula-driven construction that you see on the far right-hand screenshot there. It's an impressive achievement to string all these things together in a stacking layer, and it really just goes to show how much easier it is to do this when all of this is open source. You don't have to sit there and try and reverse engineer, oh, how did they do this? It's like, well, just go read the source code and either copy it or use their API. And on that point, there are some people that go one step deeper into this. They actually make libraries that are not even mods. These are just Java libraries that you use for Minecraft. So things like the Lucky Perms API. Now, this gets embedded inside a lot of those ones that I was mentioning earlier. So the people who are writing proprietary game modes or proprietary plugins for large multiplayer servers need a way to control what the players are allowed to do and not do. And they'll use libraries like Lucky Perms, which have the ability to go and fetch information from databases over the network to find out whether a user is allowed this feature or that feature inside of a game mode. And it's just an open source library that you can get and include just like you would in any other Java library. You just add it to the Maven, add it to the Gradle build, and include it in the project while writing that mod. And it is used by a number of mods that are also open source to provide their permission systems. You've got other ones like Adventure, which provides a complete toolkit. That's a whole set of tools to do things like string parsing, string formatting, and a lot of other little things that you would do if you were building some kind of like an RPG adventure game. And they've built this set of libraries that you can selectively include and exclude, things like having sound bars, pop-ups, and all sorts of other little experiential tools to create that crafted adventure experience. And you can choose to use as few or as many as you want. And then you've got the mods that are kind of a bit in between, like WorldEdit, where you could use it as a plugin, or you could use it as a mod, because they actually have an API to pull in WorldEdit and use WorldEdit as an actual library in your Java code. And so with that one, you kind of have a bit of a blurred line there, but at the same time, it is another example of all this being open source. You're free to do what you want with it. And there are other Java libraries that everyone just kind of collectively uses, some that you might have used yourself if you've done any Java programming. So, for instance, a significant number of mods use SnakeYAML. YAML is kind of the default configuration library that's used by most of the various mods, and consequently, everyone had to pick a YAML library, and it seems like almost everyone has. I came across one other YAML library when I was doing a bit of a survey of various mods and the code behind them. Many of them choose to use bstats for plugin metrics. So how many people are running your plugin? What server are they running it on? How many people are using this mod loader or that server version? Should I continue maintaining this for my other one? That takes me time. People use things like bstats to report back information like that so that they can improve their own developer experience. And there are more extensive mods that provide large pieces of functionality like DynMap, which provides a top-down or an isometric, depending on how you configure it, web-based map of your Minecraft world. And to provide that web-based map, they actually fully bundle the Jetty web server and fully self-host that website inside the Minecraft runtime so that when you want to open it, it's just there. There's no installing a separate Nginx instance or any extra complexity. It's fully self-contained. The mod provides the web server, includes all the HTML, the JavaScript, and all the layers, reads the data, and gives you a fully dynamic map of your Minecraft world from a plugin that's compiled down and jammed inside your Minecraft instance. And they've gotten there with a lot of help from all these open source libraries, both on the Java side and using things like Leaflet and a number of other libraries on the front end in the JavaScript. And underneath all of these things, if you start running a big Minecraft server, is going to be the matter of server management. And even if you aren't running a big Minecraft server, maybe you just don't want to be sitting there at a command line managing this all the time. It's nice to just be able to pull up a web interface and just do it. So there are a number of server management tools that people have written, which are, again, all open source. You've got the simple ones like Pterodactyl and AMP, which came out of a different project, but these are just like install it on your little box at home and log in so that you don't have to use a command line every time you want to restart the Minecraft server because it broke and the kids are going like, hey, Dad, the Minecraft server is busted. And then you've got more serious ones where it's like, oh, okay, we're going to start one up for a whole LAN. you might use something like Terraform Cloud or CloudNet v3 and put it on a beefy server and just have it do everything inside Docker and just job done on one box. Or you can go all the way to the deep end, and you've got tools like Shulker, which is a Kubernetes operator written in Rust to deploy a complete cluster of Minecraft services, from the proxy servers that were mentioned earlier to the databases that you might be using for those plugins that are doing stats and management, to additional software that you might have on the website management interface areas. And all of that is being powered for the purpose of running a Minecraft server. And it should be no surprise that with all of these kinds of management tools, more than 90% of the Minecraft servers out there are running on Linux as well, underneath all of this. And what's important to note is that when it comes to the history part of this, though, those early details that I was mentioning way back towards the start, the history of those mods and those very early open source projects can be really difficult to find and track down. And some of the people out there who are doing the best job about that are actually a very small number of people who have made it sort of their little niche in content. There are some very knowledgeable people out there, particularly these three on YouTube here, who are able to actually give a lot of valuable insight on that back information. And I definitely recommend checking them out if any of you are curious to find out more about the history of this, because they've either been doing these for long enough that they were there 10 years ago, or they were there and now do content. There is quite a lot there to learn about this historically, because, as I said, many of these people, when they started learning to program, these early mod developers, these people who started playing Minecraft when they were 15 and wanted to do something with it and were like, how do I do this? They taught themselves Java, they made a mod, they put it on a website forum. This wasn't GitHub, this was a zip file in a forum days. And then when everything broke, they either just went away or stopped. So there's so much lost history around these early mods and early open source developments in Minecraft that you only really find by doing what I've done for parts of this and extensively troll archive.org and old sections of Minecraft forums that are broken, or you find people who were there and know and connected to people. And what's quite interesting is Cygnus there actually interviews some of the developers of these projects in their Patreon feed. So there's a lot of valuable information out there about these open source projects if you are interested in finding out more about it. And since there's some time left for questions, mine's private, no. I have a nice fun one for myself. I do not want to be managing a public server. No, I've got a few other friends who play on it.
If there are questions, can we get the microphone? No more questions? Wow.
Nope.
Hang on. I'll come to you.
Even if they're just random Minecraft questions, I have trolled through so much documentation and history. The plugins that I have seen to do things have genuinely shocked me.
Thank you. My son here probably knows more about it than I do, but I get the feeling that, and from what you've said, that Mojang has never really officially supported that whole plugin ecosystem. Is that right? And why is that? Because it seems like it would be really good for them to, support that.
I feel like it's a priorities thing for them, because as a company, they are making revenue off this game, and they're going to be making, the normal business decisions around that. It's particularly notable when you look at what they provide in terms of official server hosting, the Minecraft Realms, where you can just, from the actual game, go in and just, with a Microsoft account, go and say, yeah, $8 a month, here, give me a server. That server tends to work to about 12-ish, not much more, because obviously they're probably just using the vanilla environment and not really doing any of the modifications that everyone else does to get a better experience. But that's worked out well for them business-wise, because obviously they're running it and making some money from it.
I assume you've mostly been talking about the Java-based versions of Minecraft?
The modding is not as good in Bedrock at all, no.
Right, okay, so that's all been rebuilt from scratch on .NET, right? And there's not much of a mod API?
There's a limited extent server modding, because one of the things that I didn't include is there are compatibility libraries to let people who are playing the Bedrock edition join Java servers, but it's kind of there's a lot of conflicting problems there between the two games not being exactly the same. A number of pretty significant glitches that can occur that sort of make some people fairly unhappy with letting that happen. But they do exist, and when you're on a server that's running those, you do kind of have something of a modded experience. But when you have things like you can't kill a player in PvP, or they can manipulate stuff they shouldn't be able to manipulate because Bedrock doesn't have the variables inside of it that Java has, it's, yeah.
Did you want to answer that question? That was about Microsoft and... sorry.
It sounded like more of a statement than a question.
Actually, I was going to lean onto that question, or there was a very similar question. So, well, I know about the back compatibility, but Bedrock has published just recently mods that are micropayments, and they're exchangeable, and I have a gut feeling, I don't know, I started playing Minecraft just September last year for the first time ever, 2,000 hours since then, but that's another story. But isn't Minecraft actually going to kill Java or abandon it to the hopefully to the open source world, while they will push the Bedrock, because there's no money for Mojang or Microsoft, there's no money in Java anymore, just the game itself, while the Bedrock is a plethora of the micro.
There's sort of two parts to that. There's the fact that on the one hand, they are probably going to be preferring that because, as you pointed out, the microtransaction component means they're getting a cut of the money. But at the same time, it doesn't get any of the free publicity. So that whole ecosystem of people running servers and making profit off the Java version gives free publicity to the Java version. It has YouTubers publicizing servers, getting people to buy copies of Minecraft Java Edition so that they can join those servers and play with those people and go to those places where the person who they follow and are a fan of are playing. Some of them even have like special ranks for how popular you are as a YouTuber on the server. So there is a very PR cycle aspect to the Java ecosystem that Microsoft just don't have anything like that, and that's not something they can really leverage. So they're probably trying to decide the priorities. And the other component of that is, as I understand it, part of the reason that for a while there weren't any updates to the Java version was because they were working out what they were doing. But the fact that now, for the last major releases, there has been matching updates to Bedrock and Java, the impression I get is that there is some cross-tooling going on, either via cross-compiling the Java logic into C++, because there are commercial compilers that do that now, or some other kind of mechanism where they're managing it that way. And as for the .NET part, I actually don't know how much .NET is in it. I do know that it's definitely sort of more a traditional C++ kind of code base, though. But whether it's managed C++, I've not seen any reverse engineering of Bedrock, so...
Philosophically speaking, if we go back to like 2009, 2010, right to the start, how do you think the modding sort of community and frameworks and everything would have been different had it been written in something like Python?
Well, if it was in Python, it probably would have been even easier and more extensive, because Python having a sort of an open adult philosophy compared to compiled languages where you bundle down to a Java and you get the bytecode instead, would have meant that everything was on the table for anyone to break it open and read and discover what was going on. So it's kind of hard to imagine that that would have made modding any less prolific. That's sort of the thing where, on the same time, though, you wouldn't have had the ease of deployment. One of the early factors in terms of Minecraft's popularity was that this was a game that you and some friends could literally just navigate to the website, click the Go into Game button, and with the ease of just hopping in a web chat room, you were in this Minecraft game, mucking around and having fun with it with your friends. And that was in no small part a contributor to its early popularity.
There's an online question. Somebody says they'd like to know your thoughts on mind test.
It's another one of those things where there's potential, but like many projects out there, you need to hit a critical mass. And over the years, I've seen a number of people try to do that. I can clone Twitter in a weekend. I can make my own Minecraft. It's so simple. And that's great. It's a fantastic way for a developer to learn and improve their skills. But it needs to cross a certain threshold of other people also wanting to use it. And Mindtest, while it's definitely it's not really getting any kind of advertised publicity. I've never seen anyone talk about, come join my Mindtest server, the way I see people talk about, come hop on my Mastodon instance instead of Twitter. It's got to get over that kind of threshold, which I'm not sure how long that might take them to do.
Thank you. No more from no more. Okay, well, that's been another really interesting talk. Thank you.